a model reproduction of the County Donegal Railway in the converted living room of a Dublin suburban house. 17 years after the last train ran into Ballyshannon, hardly a trace of the old railway exists. It's an ironic testimony to the efficiency with which the tracks and fittings were removed that to get any idea of what the County Donegal Railway actually looked like, you have to come here to Dublin and this model. It was here at Ballyshannon that the last rail bus arrived on New Year's Eve 1959. Today it's used as a depot by the Department of Posts and Telegraphs. A whole generation has now grown up in Donegal that never actually knew the railway. But there are still men around, like Joe Thompson. He drove the last scheduled rail bus, to whom a walk around this now almost derelict station evokes memories of the old days.
It's one of the saddest nights I'll ever remember anyway. On 31st of December 1959, we were been here about 8 o'clock. We had a full seated bus, passengers, about 44. And we were here at the platform here, there were about 104 on it, to see the last rail car coming from Donegal.
So you drove the last rail car in here?
I drove the last one in here.
Sad night for you, was it?
Very sad night. But after that, we got the bus turned, put it in the shade, went downtown. I had a few balls of malt after down the Swilly.
Larry McMahon's father was the station master at Ballyshannon, and he still lives at the old station house there. This was the old station house, or the waiting room?
This was the main waiting room here. The station master's office, parcels office. There was a longer building than that, of course, like it went right down to the end there. This was a branch line extension from Donegal to Ballyshannon. About 1905 it opened for passenger traffic. The railway is much older than that. The old Donegal Railway was opened originally around about the 1890s or something around that time, you know.
Well, tell me that your father had a theory for why the railway was sited here in the first instance.
He had theories, roughly now, whether they were correct or not. He maintained that it was much like the British government system of building railways in India.
So it was essentially just extending the empire?
Yeah, extending the empire programme, you could say, and for carrying troops, you know, ports and all this sort of thing. In theory it was good, but in practice it never worked out, you know.
Donegal's first railway was the Finn Valley Railway. Opened under the chairmanship of Lord Lifford in 1863, this line ran between Strabane and Ranelagh. Another railway, the West Donegal, was started in 1879, running from Ranelagh to Donegal town, and then eventually in 1906 the two railways merged to form the County Donegal Railway. For many of the small towns of Donegal, the railway was their economic backbone. It doesn't look much now, but 20 years ago this was the nerve centre of the old Donegal Railway. The main depot and yards were located here, and over 120 people were employed in the maintenance and upkeep of the engines and the carriages. It was the biggest single industry that the twin towns of Ranelagh and Ballybofey had. For an entire community, the railway was a way of life, and that all came to an end in 1959.
When I started in November 1932, I was a porter on the platform. There was over 150 people employed at that time, and the whole town and country actually depended on it, as it was the only works in the place, and the job was permanent.
I started in 1915 in the locomotive works as an apprentice fitter at 5 shillings a week. You had to be out at 6 in the morning, and you got off at 5:15 in the evening.
Well, if I hadn't got a job in the railway, I would have had to emigrate, for there was no employment about, and I took the railway job as a bad job for a start.
It was looked upon as a secure job. It meant a lot to me and a lot to the people in the two towns.
They come from all over the world to see the Donegal Railway. They come even from China. They were making some railway out in Tibet. And they wanted information about the working of the single line working on the Donegal. And they sent a man there to investigate. He travelled by locomotive, he travelled in the van, he travelled everything, he looked at everything going on to see how it was done.
The old railway had its own rather distinctive style. To railway enthusiasts throughout Europe, the Donegal Railway is remembered as something of a trailblazer in the world of rail travel. Under Henry Forbes, who was the manager from 1906 until the early 1940s, it introduced first diesel and then petrol-driven rail cars. When Henry Forbes, the County Donegal railway chief, introduced this petrol-driven rail car in 1906, it was acclaimed as an innovation in rail travel. But now today it languishes here in the Transport Museum in Belfast, surrounded by relics of other long-since closed Irish railways. This museum today is virtually a railway graveyard. Interred here are the engines and carriages which once crisscrossed the country. Today, of course, all that's changed. A once extensive network has now been decimated. And for the younger generation in Donegal, the railway for them only exists as the reminiscences of old employees. But etched throughout these reminiscences is the name of the former manager, Henry Forbes, an acknowledged pioneer in rail transport.